Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I thought I would do for you a roundup of all the books I've read so far in 2017. I thought this would be a really good way for you to kind of get to know the kind of books I like to read, and I'll also be telling you what star rating I gave them as I go through them. So if there's anything you recognise on this list, you'll be able to see what I thought of them. I'll also be telling you what genre each of the books are, and I'll give you a little description as well, so maybe be able to pick up a few recommendations from this video. Let's get into the books. The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss and The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss, which are books 1 and 2 in the Kingkiller Chronicles series, and this is a high fantasy series that tells the story of the infamous Kvothe. I gave The Name of the Wind 4.5 out of 5 stars and The Wise Man's Fear 4 out of 5 stars. Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, which is a contemporary feminist poetry collection, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay, which is a non-fiction collection of essays that discusses primarily feminism and race, and I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. Our Endless Numbered Days by Claire Fuller, which is a whimsical and eerie literary fiction novel, and I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter, and this is an experimentally told account of grief that's composed of a mix of poetry and literary fiction, and I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi, which is a brilliant memoir about a neurosurgeon who gets diagnosed with cancer, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. The Light Between Oceans by M.L. Stedman, which is a fictional novel telling the story of a baby that gets washed up on the shore of an island, and I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, which is of course a classic. This was a reread for me, it's one of my favourite novels of all time, and I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. The Girls by Emma Cline, which is a fictional novel telling the story of a young girl who joins a cult in a summer in the 1960s, and I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. Days Without End by Sebastian Barry, which is a historical literary fictional novel. It tells the story of two men who fight in the American Civil War, and I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. The Muse by Jessie Burton, which is a fictional novel surrounding a mysterious painting, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, which is a historical literary fiction novel that spans African history from the 1700s to modern day, and I give this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, which is a YA novel inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement, and I also gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo, and this is a literary fiction novel set in 1980s Nigeria, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The Gustav Sonata by Rose Tremaine, which is a historical literary fiction novel telling the story of young boy Gustav and his best friend Anton in Switzerland during the Second World War, and I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The Power by Naomi Alderman, which is a dystopian novel in which the power imbalance between the sexes are subverted, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The Drover's Boy by Irvin Hunt, which is a fictional novel written and set near my hometown in the Lake District, and I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. The Wonder by Emma Donoghue, which is a historical fiction novel following a nurse in 1850s Ireland who goes to observe a strange young girl, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The End We Start From by Megan Hunter, which is in part poetry and in part literary fiction that follows the mysterious environmental crisis that hits London, and I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The Princess Saves Herself in This One by Amanda Lovelace, which is a feminist poetry collection playing off themes from fairy tales, and I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, which is a classic novel about the American Depression, and I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. A Study in Scarlet by Arthur Conan Doyle, which is the first classic novel to feature Sherlock Holmes, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The Hobbit by Tolkien, which is a classic fantasy novel preceding the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. 1984 by George Orwell, which is a classic dystopian novel, which I gave 4.5 out of 5 stars. The Lesser Bohemians by Emma McBride, which is a literary fiction novel telling the story of a young girl who falls in love with an older actor in 1990s London, and I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Tin Man by Sarah Winman, which is a literary fiction novel telling the story of two men, Michael and Ellis. This became an instant favourite of mine, and I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. White Teeth by Zadie Smith, which is an epic literary fiction novel telling the story of two families who live in London, and I also gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. South of Forgiveness by Thor DeSelva and Tom Stranger, and this is a non-fiction account of a woman who got raped at the age of 16, and I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, which is a classic telling the story of one man's journey up the Congo River, and I gave this a 1.5 out of 5 stars. Charlotte's Web by E.B. White, which is a children's fiction novel telling the story of Pig Wilbur and his best friend Charlotte, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The Tobacconist by Robert C. Thaler, which is a historical literary fiction novel set in Austria in the Second World War, which I gave 4.5 out of 5 stars to. The World's Wife by Carol Ann Duffy, which is a poetry collection that gives voices to the many women behind famous men in myths and history, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, which is a classic children's fiction novel about many different eccentric animal friends, and I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry, which is a historical fiction novel that centres around rumours of a mysterious creature returning, and I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The Trouble with Goats and Sheep by Joanna Cannon, which is a literary cosy crime novel set in a small town in the 1970s, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus, which is a YA crime thriller novel that I gave 4 out of 5 stars to. Gather the Daughters by Jenny Melamed, which is a dystopian novel set on a patriarchal island, which I give 3.5 out of 5 stars to. Elmet by Fiona Mosley, which is a literary fiction novel about a family who live in the woods secluded from the nearest town, and I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur, which is a poetry collection following Milk and Honey that I mentioned earlier, and I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. And finally, A Patchwork Planet by Anne Tyler, which is a literary fiction novel telling the story of an ordinary man, Barnaby Gatelin, and I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. So that's all the books that I've read so far in 2017. I really hope you enjoyed getting kind of insight into the kind of things I've been reading. I'm really sorry that I didn't have all of the physical copies of the books to show you. Some of the books are left at home. I'm at uni right now, and I've lent some to other people and some of them listened to on audiobooks. I've had to insert pictures for those. I hope that's okay. Please let me know if you've read any of the books that I've read this year and what you thought of them. I'd love to know. So that's all for this video, and I'll hopefully see you soon. Bye.